I'm Thuranki Ramacharaka. Well, it's kind of like story time. But not just story time. This story is called The Black Smoke. I wrote it. It's a true story, every bit of it. It belongs here on this channel because here I do refer to astral entities, their influence on humanity, and the like. This is a personal encounter that I had with some sort of entity thing, which in large takes the form of black smoke, and I've heard that this has happened to some other people too. I initially wrote this story, a year or two ago, and submitted it to another channel for narration, a channel that deals with the so-called paranormal. Well, the story, there were some comments under it. Some were good, some were not. Some said that's obviously fake, it's a lie. Some people pointed out all kinds of reasons why the story was obviously a lie, down to this guy who wrote this is obviously schizophrenic, or, he's on drugs, he needs to have another drink. Some people, one person who made a comment got into such detail, picking apart the story, pointing out that this cannot be true, here's why, things don't work this way, blah, blah, blah. Somebody else said, this guy just runs on and on and on. He can't write worth a damn. Oh, for God's sake. So listen, before I get started here, I just want to put all that into the shut up mode. Okay? It's a true story, just as it's written. And when I wrote it, I didn't have it in mind to write a masterpiece of literature. I just wanted to tell what happened. So take it as it comes. The Black Smoke. In the early 1980s, during my third year of living in New York City's Lower East Side, I sold all of my possessions and bought a backpack and other survival gear, including a sleeping bag. After that, I had a little over $200 left from my transactions. I put the $200 in my pocket, pulled on my new hiking boots, strapped on my backpack, and dispatched myself toward the Holland Tunnel, planning to leave town and never come back. On the way, I changed the direction and went to the top of the Empire State Building to say a silent farewell to the city. But while up there, I decided that I really had nowhere to go, and that although I had not yet had my own apartment in the city, I already had everything a person could want right there below me. So I went back to my neighborhood and I sat on a stoop on St. Mark's Place near 2nd Avenue, feeling content with no further plans at all. I might have stayed there, right there, until the sidewalks cracked, but soon an old car rattled up and stopped. I hadn't known that an acquaintance of mine named Susan had such a contraption, but there she was driving it. Susan hopped out and frantically asked me where I was going. I told her I was going nowhere. Then she begged me to take over her apartment insofar as she was leaving the city, and she wanted full closure on her way out. Well, she said that the rent was only $200 a month, and that she had already paid for the coming month. She added that the apartment, which was on the northwest corner of 9th Street and Avenue C, was a nice 5-room, non-railroad style flat. She pleaded me for the $200 and added that the landlord didn't really care who lived there as long as he got the rent on time. She seemed frantic to get on the ray, so I figured I was getting lucky, because getting one's own apartment in the city is so difficult to do that some people put up with being other people's roommates for decades. So I gave her the money, which now left me with only $6. I did say, didn't I, that I had $206 left from my transaction? A little over $200, I said. Well, it was $206. Okay, so now I had, where am I? $6. As she rushed back to her misfiring car, I asked her about the apartment door key. She hurried back and said, "Oh yeah, here it is. The key deposit was $6. If you have it, I'd like it, but if you don't, it's okay." I dished out my last money to her, and off she went. I never saw Susan again. Now, there was one of those points at which some nasty person said, "Well, now, see, it's a lie already. He just happened to have the right amount of money." Yeah, I just happened to have the right amount of money. I walked a few blocks to my new phase of life. The apartment was on the southwest corner of the 3rd floor, facing 9th Street, and the building next door toward Avenue B. So it was a corner apartment. The apartment was totally empty, but very dirty with animal hair, caked several inches thick around all the edges. Inside the door extended a hallway that terminated in the living room, which faced the building next door. Now, about halfway down that hall was a skinny bedroom on the left, which faced 9th Street. Once in the living room, there was a master bedroom also to the left, so it too, like the skinny bedroom, faced 9th Street. I noted that the skinny bedroom had a strange feel to it, one that made me not want to go in the bedroom. That fact, plus the fact that the other bedroom was larger, caused me to select that latter one, the bigger one, as my personal bedroom, at least until I could thoroughly clean out the whole place. That night, I put my sleeping bag on the center of my bedroom floor, and I crawled into it with my feet toward the door, bedroom door, and my head toward the curtainless windows facing 9th Street. A bit of light came in. I had no curtains, right? But soon I got to sleep, happy to have a place of my own and to myself at last. At some point during the night I awakened, and I felt the same strangeness that I'd felt earlier when I had peered into the skinny bedroom, which was now on the other side of the wall that was to my right, as I lay on the floor. Now, at first everything looked normal, though, but I had this feeling, and it woke me up. But a moment later I saw black smoke coming through the entire length of that wall's upper edge, right up by the ceiling. That wall to my right, as I lay there, on the other side of which was the skinny bedroom. Black smoke. Naturally, I suspected that a fire ensued, but I smelled, heard, and saw nothing else that indicated a fire. I stared at the slowly rolling smoke for a few seconds, trying to figure it out. It just kept creeping in, although there was no opening through which it could pass from the other side or from within the wall. Having already experienced plenty of strange occurrences so far in my life, I thought, okay, what is it this time? The thought brought on a certain level of fear and a sudden desire to get up and get out of the whole apartment. By now, I was wide awake, and I started to unzip my sleeping bag while keeping my eye on the smoke. Before I even got my bag unzipped enough to get out of it, the incoming movement of the smoke sped up considerably, and it began to stretch toward the bedroom door, which is where I was going to go. So I stopped moving, and the smoke resumed its slower motion, coming in through the wall. However, that was happening. And it was getting rather thick by now, and it had reached across my ceiling about 2 feet. As I lay there watching it, it started lowering down towards me slowly. And again, I thought about escaping through the door, but without even making a move this time in that direction. And instantly, the smoke once again picked up speed and started moving curling over toward the door. The realization dawned on me that the smoke was not ordinary smoke, that it was alive, and it was calculating. I sensed that no matter what I did, the smoke intended to come into contact with my body, and that I needed to do whatever I could to avoid that contact, as though such contact would bring about my doom. Now the black smoke was curling down toward me more rapidly, sort of like it had when it had sped up and gone toward the door twice. Now it was coming down toward me at that speed. I considered jumping out one of the windows behind my head, although such a jump, that would lead to serious injury or to death. And counting the ground floor, where there would have been storefronts had the building been kept up to shape. Counting that, I was on the fourth floor. It was the third floor of apartments, but it was the fourth floor of the building. And these were like 10-foot ceilings, so serious injury or death if I did that. It was just an experimental consideration, this jumping out of the window thing. It was kind of like just to see what the smoke would do. Me thinking about that. Well, it didn't react. It didn't react by moving toward the window, as though it knew I wasn't really going to jump out. I thought once more about escape through the door, and the smoke quickly blocked that way. For the third time. And by now it was only about 4 feet above me, and it was rolling down with increasing speed. I commenced with using mental methods to try to make it leave me alone. I had read a little bit from, say, the book, one or two chapters of which I've now narrated here on this channel. The book by, what's his name, L.W. De Lawrence, The Master Key. I knew a little bit about uses of willpower and focus and concentration and so forth. And these things had helped me before with similar affairs. I mean, most of my life I've had similar affairs going on. I employed such, methods at the time. I used to practice telepathy. In fact, this is what it says right here. I tried these methods to try to make it leave me alone. I used to practice telepathy with friends. And I sent, in a telepathic way, this black smoke some strongly willed mental messages to back off. But it just rolled in more heavily through the wall. I then coupled my mental commands with settled confidence and the names of various archangels and other entities such as Buddha, Krishna, and some others, all of which only seemed to make the smoke more insistent to get me, whatever get me might mean. I resorted to the last holy name I could think of. I said out loud, "In the name of Jesus," and I mean the real one. Not some religious version of him, but like the real Jesus. Go back to where you came from. I'm saying this out loud now. Leave me now. I said this with all the willpower, and confidence that I could pull together. Well, at first the smoke stopped moving, and it just hung above me, still stretching back to its point of entry along the wall. Mentally now, I repeated my words, kind of like a mantra, gaining more single-minded focus on them as I went. The smoke then slowly retreated and eventually disappeared the way it had come. So then I mentally added, "And stay out!" I felt humbly victorious, like I had on other occasions when sheer will or maybe sheer luck or even sheer divine intervention had saved me from freaky things. I got up and looked into the skinny bedroom from where the smoke had rolled in, and I saw nothing unusual there. I wished that Susan was still around so that I could ask her what had made her so anxious to move out and to obtain the closure that I had provided her. The smoke didn't bother me again, so I pretty much forgot about it during the next few months. I cleaned up the entire apartment and I burned pure camphor in the skinny bedroom. After that, the room felt fine, and I even built a loft bed in it, and I slept there for a while renting out the master bedroom to pay rent. See, now other people had to be, my roommates instead of me being other people's roommates. Now I could get somebody to pay the rent. Yeah. Eventually I gained employment, and I didn't need roommates anymore because now I could pay my own rent. And so I lived alone again. Life was going rather well, and I made the acquaintance of a young man who turned out to be the best friend I've ever had. His name was Jimmy Spencer. Sadly, Jimmy died in a fire about 10 years later. But that's another story. Now, Jimmy Spencer, the one to whom I refer here, same Jimmy, you'll find in another story here on this channel. I've already narrated and uploaded. I think the name of the story is The Death Squat, and on the thumbnail is the word damn. Same Jimmy. Alright. Jimmy visited me regularly. I taught him a lot of things about occult philosophy, paranormal activity, and about applications of willpower. I even shared with him a couple of books of William Walker Atkinson's. The Astral World, for example, which I have yet to upload here. I've narrated the whole thing. Used to be on my original Saranki Ramacharaka channel. Anyway, yeah. I told him about all the weird stuff that I'd experienced since my birth, but I forgot to tell him about the black smoke. Eventually, I ran into some trouble, and I had to move out of the city. I hadn't paid rent the whole time I lived there. Really. This was because of broken windows which went unrepaired, although I had saved the money all up. And I showed it to the scumbag landlord, a real slumlord. Nasty guy. Every time he asked for it, I had it in my pocket. I'd pull it out and wave it in front of his face. Fix my windows. And the money's yours. And he never fixed my windows. So he couldn't legally throw me out. No. This was the way the law worked there. Okay. He, having grown used to me not paying rent, he didn't notice that I moved out and turned the place over to Jimmy. And the landlord had already seen Jimmy there many times. So Jimmy going in and out and me not being there, it was all the same to the landlord. He didn't know any different. All right. For about 5 months, Jimmy managed to dodge any questions about me that the landlord asked him. And so my disappearance from the premises went undetected. And it turns out that during that time, inadvertently, Jimmy ran a 24-hour-a-day party for about 5 months. Every day since the day I had left. I was in contact with him frequently. By phone. Landline, which is all there was back then. It wasn't his doing that this party happened. I mean, people just kept coming. And as a person would leave, somebody else would come. It was just a constant turnover, 24 hours a day. It was weird. But anyway, this was going on the whole time. And back then on the Lower East Side, neighbors, other tenants in the building, what did they care? They probably didn't even notice. This was New York City, Lower East Side. Very little law enforcement influence. Wild neighborhood. Wild. I'm telling you. All right. On New Year's Eve, as the year turned over to 1984, Jimmy called me on my landline in Pennsylvania at about 8 p.m. And he said, "Yo, I need your help. Something really bad is happening here. Immediately I felt the blood rush out of my face, or into it, whichever that is that happens when you realize there's some bad stuff going on, and it has something to do with you. Now, I remembered the black smoke for the first time in nearly a year. I told him to tell me what's going on. I had a little trouble hearing him amid the noise of the party. But I made out something about people crashing in the skinny bedroom and then having a hard time with black smoke, trying to pull them through the wall to the apartment next door. And that all the chicks, as he put it, were getting too scared to even come to the party anymore, let alone go in that room. I told him I would drive right up and deal with it. So I got a hold of my current girlfriend, Tina, and she came along. She'd never been to New York City before. I said, you want to have a wild time? New Year's Eve, going into 1984? She said, yeah. So here we went. And this way I wasn't driving alone, you know. I yelled up to the window. Well, about 4 hours later, this is right at midnight now, we pulled up in front of the building. I yelled up to the window for Jimmy to drop down the key so that we could get in the downstairs door, which he did. When I knocked on the apartment door with Tina, Jimmy answered. He answered along with my second best friend ever, Mike. Now, Tina and I entered. Now, all of a sudden, nobody else was there but Jimmy and Mike. Huh? Now, that's weird, right? This was New Year's Eve, right at the moment when the Times Square ball drops and all that. Nobody else there. Now, for 5 months, they'd all been there. Now they're not there? Weird. Okay, yeah, weird. This would be another point at which somebody, you know, on that other channel where this was initially narrated by someone else, one of those commenters, oh, this is not real. If there was going to be a party there, it would be now. Yeah, well, zip it. This is the way it happened. Yeah, it's weird. That's why I'm writing the story. Jeez, that's why I'm telling it. It's all weird. Tina and I entered. Nobody else was there but Jimmy and Mike. And I asked what happened to all the people. Jimmy said they had all just walked out, one after the other, just moments before we got there. Almost 5 months of steady party, and suddenly they all just left. Like I said, weird. Especially weird because of all nights to party, this was it, New Year's Eve, like I already said. The sounds coming up from the street now, though, they were especially loud. Well, they always were loud. But they were especially loud now, as one would expect, right? Lots of yelling, sirens, the steady thunder of M80 firecrackers, entire mats of black cat firecrackers, bottle rockets, gunshots, so-called quarter sticks of dynamite, although they're packed solid with gunpowder. They're about that big. The latter of which will send shock waves through entire buildings, and I know that because I've dropped a few out my windows at other times. I used to sell all this stuff. Oh yeah, shock waves through the building, all the way through. Oh yeah. Well, I knew their unique sound because, I just said this. Anyway, why everybody had just walked out moments ago, we couldn't figure. Better to be inside getting smashed than wandering out there in the war zone, right? Right. I had arrived prepared to deal with my frightened friends and a considerably sinister happenstance. But Jimmy and Mike, all of a sudden, seemed to have forgotten all about the actual reason why I had driven that distance on such a dangerous night for driving. I felt pissed off that they acted like nothing was wrong. But I felt far more pissed off when they insisted on telling me that I just have to see what's inside the apartment next door. Huh? And Tina and I both noticed a glazed look in their eyes. And then they both continued their excitement over my arrival, not to resolve the initial problem, but so that they could take me into the apartment next door. Huh? This really pissed me off, guys. I knew that whatever was bothering people in the skinny bedroom and was scaring them away had to do with that apartment. I also knew that Jimmy knew better than to play recklessly with such things, and he certainly knew better than to break into an apartment in the same building in which he lived, and to do all of that while innocent people are trying to have a good time right there on the premises. Come on. Jimmy knew better. Something was wrong. Something had taken over his mind. And Mike's mind, too. And it caused everybody else to leave all at once, too. Yeah. Something black smoke related. Something had drawn him into that other apartment, too. Same thing. Whatever was doing all this, same thing behind it. Not good. Are you with me? Are you with me, pilgrims? Not good. Well, I asked how the hell they got into that apartment next door. Yeah? I mean, these were solid steel doors. Set in frames that are steel and have concrete poured down through them, the frames. These are well-anchored doors. Getting into that apartment wouldn't have been any easy task. I had never seen anybody go in or out of that place. The apartment always seemed to be unfrequented. I had no idea who lived there. Seemed like nobody. And his door was like all the rest, like I said, heavy steel and locked firmly into a steel frame with concrete filling. Mike laughed at my question and said it was easy. He said that he had climbed out of the window in the skinny bedroom, mine, or now Jimmy's, climbed out that window and had crawled across the outer wall of the building on the 9th Street side and had opened the first window next door and climbed in. And then had unlocked the apartment's door from inside. He said he had done this shortly after they had talked to me on the phone. And that for the next several hours, they both had gone in there and rummaged through all sorts of weird stuff, as they put it, and had brought some of it back and stuck it in the skinny bedroom. And now they couldn't wait for me to look at all of it, and then to go in with them to the apartment next door to get more. Now, wait a second. Hold on. Pilgrims? Opened the window in the skinny bedroom and climbed out it and climbed across the outer wall? Whoa, no. This is another point at which somebody could say, all right, you're making this up. No, I'm not. The outer wall of the building was not the kind you could climb. I don't care what skills you have in climbing rocks and so forth, or cliffs, or whatever. This wasn't like a brick wall, with little indents where the mortar joints are, where you can maybe get your fingers in a little grip. It wasn't like that here. This was stones that were like broken, not with places to grasp, but just kind of like a little rippled surface, like rippled glass cubes, you know. And mortar that came right out to the very edges. You know, your hand would just slide right down the whole outside of the wall. There was no place to grab onto to scale the wall. No. If it were made like that, people would be climbing up the front of the building and breaking in. But that didn't happen. No. Huh. No. No. And it was some good distance over to the first window of the apartment next door. I'd say a good 8 feet. And how would he get the window open over there? While trying to hang on. I mean, no. And then climb in it. But this is what he said he did. And you know what, guys? There wasn't any way to break in that door. And sure enough, the door was unlocked because we did go over there. Let me finish. Let me go on with the story here. It had been unlocked. Had to have happened the way Mike said. And Jimmy backed up the story. Like, yeah, that's what he did. Like it was nothing. This is weird stuff. And if you're thinking this sounds like it's just a confabulation and that it cannot be true and that it has to be made up, I agree. But it is the truth. That's why I'm relating it to you. Okay. They couldn't wait for me to go look at all the stuff they had stolen and then go back over there and get more with them. Well, it was insane. They had been so stupid as to do all that. To enter the very place where all the trouble was coming from. Insane. And this bit about Mike having crawled across the outside wall and into that other window. Seemingly impossible. The building's exterior, I'm just going over old ground here. Because I gave you an aside saying all of this, but it's written right here. It wasn't scalable. It was overall smooth. Hell, if that were possible, I would have tried to do so on that first night to get away from the black smoke. How Mike had done it, even he couldn't explain. He just said he did it. And then he didn't have any trouble doing it. Didn't have any trouble holding on while I raised the other window and climbed in. Needless to say, I felt increasingly uneasy about this whole affair. And I felt convinced that some sort of terrible spell had come over not only them, but over the entire scene. And now there was all this stuff that they had brought in from the apartment next door and put it into the to the very apartment where we now stood, huh? Some part of whatever evil, whatever you want to call it, inhabited that other apartment was now in my apartment. Or Jimmy's apartment, or all of our apartments at the moment. Tina's included now, right? She's there. Yeah, and now I got to think, yeah, this is my apartment, damn it. Yeah, I might have turned it over to Jimmy, but with the way Mike and Jimmy are right now, no. Mine. Mine. This was now my problem. Jimmy and Mike seemed to be mentally just gone. And then there's poor Tina, who had never even been to the city before. Depending entirely upon me for her safety. Hell, at this point, she would have been better off outside. You get it? You get my point? I was burning with anger and trying not to tremble with fear. I drew on my will to confidently and coolly manage the situation, which I did pretty well. Although I had no plan of how I would go about managing the situation, not with all of these new developments in place that I had just now become aware of. I had to do something. Nobody else would, or even could. This thing, whatever it was, had messed with me in the past, and I had won, huh? But it was bad now that I had moved out, and now it was messing with my friends, and it had messed with their friends. It was all up to me, and we couldn't just walk away from it. Not now that they had stolen all that stuff from next door. So I looked at the stuff they had stolen. Sure enough, it was as weird as they said it was. I can't remember it all. I barely remember any of it. I do remember a pair of full-length, heavily padded pants that were far too skinny for anybody of adult height to get on. I ran into that musician guy, Prince, once. Maybe he was skinny enough to get them on. I don't know, but these just were not. They didn't look made for a human being. I mean, they were adult length. They weren't adult width. I mean, somebody would have to have a waist about like that to get them on. It was weird, man. Okay, they were very padded too. And what more? The 3 differing parfait glasses that were so old that the glass of each contained air bubbles. A few old canes that looked like they were hand-carved out of some wicked tree that stood in a haunted forest. A few cast-iron articles that fit together into a sort of incense burner that seemed to be straight out of a horror movie in which witches boil people alive. There were other items. Like I said, I can't recall them. None of the items looked or felt normal. They all had the same feel about them, a creepy feel. And they... better yet, a dark feel. Very dark, ancient feel. Like they shouldn't be touched by human hands. I said we have to get these things back into the apartment next door and get out of the building. But Jimmy and Mike refused to do anything but to show me all the rest of the stuff in the apartment next door. They seemed unable to even engage in any conversation other than that. Like they were absolutely drawn into that other apartment, and they were dead set on getting me in there too. I thought, this is all wrong, and it's not going to end well. Not going to end well at all. I agreed. I argued with the two of them for a while. And we then calmed it down a little bit, and Jimmy showed me a lot of the other stuff he'd been collecting from dumpsters in the area and from junk-filled vacant lots. Yeah, back then, hey, you walk around certain of these neighborhoods like this one in New York City, guys, at night and just, like, look through things that people put out. You can find all kinds of stuff. Brand new jewelry. You could nicely furnish your apartment if you just give it enough time, one piece at a time. I mean, restaurants would put out all their tables and chairs and furniture and replace them with new ones, but the ones they put out are in perfectly good condition. You name it, you could find it. So this dumpster diving thing, or this going through vacant lots, don't think of it like you think of it about your hometown. Alright? Alright. He had boxfuls of costume, jewelry, gadgets, trinkets of all sorts, artifacts made of gold, silver, ivory, a bag full of fabric, one side of which was purple fur about 3 inches long, an assortment of acrylic paints, some cardboard New Year's party hats. Why not those, right? All 4 of us settled into making out of these cardboard New Year's party hats what we called magic hats. We each selected the things that we wanted from all of his stuff he had collected to adorn our hats and painted them up really cool. I fashioned the papier-mâché corkscrew-looking upwardly curved horns, and I glued them to the sides of my now black and gold-colored hat, and glued on some of the purple fur at the top. We sat there discussing this stuff, and this apartment next door, I was trying to get them into a different state of mind while we sat there and focused on doing some artwork, craft work, making something that we could put on our heads as a sort of celebration of New Year's Eve. And all of our hats turned out looking like some kind of magic, ritual, kind of, like wizard hat type of thing. Well, I guess it was just the mood of the place. Anyway, they were pretty cool. Mike's hat ended up pink and black, and he said it would attract girls to him. Tina remained working on hers. Oh, Jimmy's hat ended up having little saloon door tabs on the front. That when opened revealed a small photo of two girls kissing each other. Ah, jeez. Oh, we took all the symbolism seriously, too. Tina remained working on hers for a good while longer, and while she remained content with her endeavor, she had something to focus on, something to do. Good. Again, Jimmy and Mike took up their former line of talk, and here I was this whole time trying to figure out, what am I going to do? What are we going to do? And he demanded it, now it's time to go next door. Great. All the while I had been focusing on what to do, like I just said, hoping that I would come up with a plan while making my magic hat. But I hadn't come up with a plan, other than to open the door next to our own, throw the shit inside, and get out of the building. But now it seemed like nobody was going to agree with me. Now, speaking of hats, you see, I got one on right now. This is like going back to former decades. It was the custom back then, at least in that city, for young guys to wear cool hats when roaming the streets. Jimmy and I both found hats, and I was wearing mine that night. Jimmy had his on the whole time, too. His was black felt, similar to a fedora, like gangsters used to wear back during the Prohibition. You know, the 40s type of hat. 30s and 40s. His was similar to that, slightly broader brim. I wore my hat too, and it was felt, but it was tan colored and had an even broader brim, a little bit on the Panama side. Now, why I mention this, the ones we had on our heads, especially my own, is relevant here. It's going to become clear, too. But for now, I'll just add that my party hat, now turned magic hat, ended up looking like the one a magician would wear in some bygone era when the difference between good and evil was indistinct. This matched my character back then, too. For the result of every divination reading that I'd ever had done, whether tarot, palmistry, handwriting analysis, astrological chart, involved me being some kind of a magician. And I'd always, in one way or another, walked a fine line between good and evil, carrying goodness in my heart and striving to destroy evil, but continually finding myself in the midst of the latter. And tonight, obviously, was no different. Well, while we were making our magic hats and I was trying to come up with a plan, Mike and Jimmy filled me in on what had been happening that had drawn me to drive there from Pennsylvania. In short, people would get drunk or whatever, and then would go into the skinny bedroom to crash. Then while they'd be sleeping, they would have nightmares about black smoke coming through the wall that separates my apartment from the one next door. And the bed was right up against that wall in there, in that skinny bedroom. The smoke would form the shape of a hand, which would wrap around them and try to pull them back through the wall. Now that involves them going to sleep. Either that, or they would wake up suddenly and see that happening. Anyway, while they were awake, with their bodies jammed up against that wall, and they would have to struggle to pull away from the wall and to get out of the hand-shaped black smoke's grasp. Now, either way, three things were common to every account. The black smoke forming a big hand, the hand wrapping it tightly around their bodies, and number 3, it trying to pull them through the wall into the apartment next door. Jimmy said that some of the girls who had experienced it had come out of the room screaming, and some of the guys had come out crying. He said that overall it had been scaring people away and ruining the party, and then just moments before I got there, finally everybody had just left. Ruining the party, I thought. The party? To hell with the party! I didn't give a damn about their ruined party. This was some terrible shit. And it pissed me off all over again. This time not at Jimmy or Mike, though, but at the thing which dared to come back and now mess with my friends after I moved out. Wearing my felt hat, I finally joined Mike for a trek next door just to get the two of them to stop pestering me about going there. Jeez. I said, just for a minute, though. And then we're returning the stolen stuff and getting the hell out. Mike agreed. Now, because Mike said the apartment next door was totally dark inside with no visible light switches available due to all the stuff in there, all the stuff. We each lit and carried a short white candle, the kind bought by the box full at local Caribbean stores for votive purposes. He entered the dark apartment first. I hadn't suspected that the door hinges were spring-loaded. Nah, mine weren't. And therefore I didn't expect it to swing closed as I tried to enter. He went in first, like I said, and he let go of the door. Boom! Door comes shut on my... The door hit me smack in the face, causing me to back up. My hat fell off, there goes the hat. My hat fell off, but now listen. And the door latched shut. I bent down to retrieve my hat. Now look, the space under the door, between the bottom of the door and the threshold, was about like that. Very slight. Now listen. My hat fell off, the door latch shut. I bent down to retrieve my hat, but it had somehow got stuck under the door. There was a marble slab under the door, the threshold, which separated the floor, which separated the hallway, the outside hallway floor there, from the apartment floor inside, the threshold. The marble piece was about a ½ inch high, and the distance between it and the bottom of the door was only about ½ an inch, like I said. My hat stuck halfway out from under that door, smashed flat. I mean, it was like this, halfway in, and the bottom of the door right here, center of the hat, smashed flat. Now, how the hell did that happen? It would take quite a bit of work to do that on purpose. Quite a lot. I pushed open the door a bit, and it took me some effort to pull my hat out. I popped it back into shape, and I put it on my head, and I went on inside. Now, light from the hallway, as the door was open, light shined in from the hallway. Outside of the apartment door. Right outside my apartment door, too. Mike was not in sight already. It was hard to figure out where he'd gotten to so quickly. More hard to figure out, though, was how all the stuff that I saw in there, when the door was still open a bit, stayed in its position. The entire place was packed almost full, with only a tunnel through it. Going in from the door. A tunnel. I mean a tunnel through it. I mean a tunnel, like, now I'm reading. For things even arched across the ceiling. To get through, you had to stoop over and make sure not to touch anything. By the way it all looked and was arranged, if you touch anything, it might all come tumbling down. It looked like everything is so loosely interlocked with everything else, so that disturbing any one item would make the whole arrangement fall apart. It gave the appearance of defying the laws of nature, the laws of physics. That's what it looked like to me. I only got a glimpse of this scene as I closed the door behind me. Then all there was my candle for light. I held the candle down low so that I could see exactly where to step first. And now something else hit me in the face. But it didn't knock off my hat this time. I hadn't seen it coming. It turned out to be a small, narrow wood framed glass door attached to a sort of hutch that stood just to the left of me. As soon as the door shut behind me and I held my candle down, well, here comes this door. The top of it just went right under my hat and over my hand. Glass. I have no idea what made that open just then. I pushed it closed, and I noticed that even this hutch-like piece of furniture, in the light of my candle now, it looked really old. It had a weird design that made me think of haunted houses. And it was full of disturbing-looking objects, although I couldn't make out what they were very well. They just reminded me of shapes that I thought I'd seen bushes take when I've walked alone in the woods at night. I called to Mike, and he answered, "Just come on in. You have to walk straight ahead and follow the tunnel to the right. Come on back here. You have to see all this cool stuff." I refused. "No, Mike, let's go now. I've already seen enough. We can't stay in here." But he wouldn't come. So I went on through the tunnel of stuff. Everything cast shadows due to the meager light that my candle created, and it appeared to me that all sorts of things poked toward the center of this little narrow passage tunnel thing that I was crawling through. Well, not crawling hands and knees, but stooping and, to get through and then stepping over other stuff. Looked like all sorts of stuff was poking toward the center. This stuff arranged, forming the tunnel, like booby traps everywhere. It took quite a contortionist act to get through there and not bang into things. It all looked like it was arranged in such a manner, also that it looked easier to get in than to get back out. If I were to go to the back, back toward the door, even more difficult. Like a trap. Like even though the going in was difficult, it was easy when compared to trying to go the other direction. I noted the effect, for I hoped that any second now, Mike and I would be heading for the door. About 10 feet further in, and I rounded the turn to the right, the only way through. This was an entire apartment apparently full of creepy stuff. So full that the only way through was the one way Mike had gone. And this was in the direction of whatever room it was that bordered my skinny bedroom next door. And, of course, in the direction of the window into which Mike had mysteriously entered in the first place. As I turned right, I heard a noise to my left. Through all the stuff. Something was crawling through it, maybe about 20 feet away. Something bigger than a rat or a cat, by the sound of it. Something about the size of maybe a medium weight dog. I called out, "Mike, hurry up. Something's in here. We have to get out right now." "Yeah, I know," he drawled out, suddenly sounding like a junkie about to go into full nod. "It's okay. Just come on back. Back here. It's really cool." "Oh, yeah, right. Huh? Just like, I thought to myself earlier, I thought again. Any second now, this isn't going to end well. I have to get him out of here. He's not in his right mind. This whole thing is just plain bad. After my right turn, I stepped a few feet ahead, and now I saw before me a significant change of environment. The passage opened up a good bit. and I could stand upright and walk more freely, for the floor was now clear of objects. I noticed that I stood in a small circle of nothing but open floor space, a circle. Somehow the idea of a circle bothered me. I thought of covens and seances. The room into which I had just entered had no actual doorway to go into, although it was clearly a skinny bedroom, just like the one in my own apartment next door. I think the wall had been taken down. Of course, straight ahead of me was the wall through which had come the black smoke and the thing that had reached through from this side and tried to pull back people back through it from the other side. That same wall was now in front of me, about 6 feet away. A dresser stood right up against that wall, a very old dresser, one that had a large wood-framed mirror rising from its rear side, right up against the wall. The reflective silver nitrate coating on the back of the mirror had cracked terribly from age, and in the dim candle light made my reflection look eerily fractured. I stared at that for a moment, unable to think clearly. I felt like something deep inside me fractured right then, like my reflection. And I also had the feeling that I was looking into something that was more than a mirror, more like a window through which stood pieces of myself looking back at me. Mike had stood his candle on the dresser and was crawling high up to my right on top of a pile of boxes full of whatever things they contained. It looked like he should not be able to be up there, like everything should instead be tumbling down, but he managed to just stay up there. Kind of like climbing across outside of the building. He was pulling one thing after another out of the boxes. He rooted around like he wasn't sure what he was doing, but like he couldn't stop doing whatever it was. Between the dresser and I, a small bed rested on the floor. The head end of it pointed toward the window into which Mike had entered, and obviously had climbed over a lot of stuff to get to the open circle where I now stood at the bedside. The bed was only about 2.5 feet wide and maybe 4 feet long. Try to picture this with me. It wasn't a crib, though. It was a bed. It was an actual bed. And it was freshly made with clean white sheets tucked in all the way around. A bottom sheet. Tucked in all the way around. Clean. No dust. Freshly made. Not wrinkled. A small pillow lay at the left end. My left. You know, the head end of the bed. Facing the window there. Wrapped in a small, clean, white pillowcase. Everything made to size. The sheet and the pillowcases were the only things in sight that were clean. I noticed that no light shone in through the window, although there was nothing covering it. I also noticed that no sound from outside came in from the street below. I furthermore noticed that the room felt completely still and peaceful. Even soothing. Despite the disturbing mirror reflection in front of me and all the rest. I suddenly felt sleepy, just as Mike slowly mumbled, "It makes you just want to lie down on the bed and go to sleep. Doesn't it? Just go to sleep." Yes, it does, I said. And that's why we have to get out of here. Come on, man. Mike, come on. We don't have any time to fool around. Get down. Get your candle and let's get out of here. Something's coming. It's not safe in here. No, he droned. I'm going to stay here and see what else I can find to keep. You go on ahead. I'll come later. Go on. I couldn't change his mind. So I decided I had to leave him there. I'd be damned if I were going to stay there any longer. He wasn't keeping up his end of the deal. We had made an agreement that we would just look inside, throw the stuff back in, and go. Those were the conditions under which I even went over there. I wasn't going to stay in there anymore. There was Jimmy and my girlfriend Tina next door waiting. And now Mike in here not sticking to our agreement. I chose to go be with the living. For in my mind right then, Mike was about as good as dead. I said, okay, I'm leaving. Get the hell down from there, and no matter what, don't leave your candle sitting there to catch the whole building on fire. I turned around and I stepped into the tunnel of stuff again. As I rounded the left turn now toward the door, I could again hear what was creeping around through all of the stuff. It was louder and closer now. I hurried on, stepping over things, bending around other things, ducking under yet other things, seemingly fighting my way through a maze of objects much older than I, and of forces much older than even those. I exited holding my hat with one hand and my candle with the other one, nearly thrusting myself out into the hallway. The door slammed closed behind me, leaving Mike alone in there except for whatever was coming after him. Tina was still working on her magic hat. She smiled at me and asked me how it went. Jimmy, however, got all riled up at me for leaving Mike alone next door. Well, we argued about that for a while. Jimmy and I. He said I was responsible for Mike, and now I have to go back after him. I counter-argued that I'd done my share, and that if anybody's going back after Mike, it was going to have to be him, for I wasn't the one to get us into this mess in the first place. Our argument continued with each of us making good points and sticking firmly to them until we heard something that was impossible to hear. Impossible, because we heard it through the layers, all the layers of brick and plaster separating my living room from the apartment next door. Hey, I'd never even heard any of my neighbors ever in their apartments the whole time I lived there. This was an old building. I mean, like, between the inside and the outside, or, the outer walls, 4 bricks layers thick plus stone. And then plaster, horsehair. Yeah. And 2 layers like that separating walls, and like 3 layers of brick and plaster on both sides, horsehair, wood, separating apartments. I never heard anybody ever in that, except for people in my own apartment. One of my next door neighbors on the other side, he was known to be pretty loud. I never heard him. He was a guy named George Stonefish. He was Native American. I never heard him. From my living room, we heard Mike next door, repeatedly just mumbling, "Stop bothering me. Just leave me alone. I just want to sleep. Leave me alone." Well, this ended our argument, Jimmy's and mine, for the time being. Tina, Jimmy, and I just stood there in the middle of my living room, transfixed. Mike's quietly moaned pleas shook us to the core. We couldn't imagine what was going on with him. But we knew he was in some pretty deep shit. Then Jimmy swore at me for the first time in his life for leaving Mike in there like that. I felt really bad, but I still refused to go back next door. Then we heard even worse things going on. We heard the window next door. Seemed like it must have been the one that he had climbed into in the first place. Slam up, viciously. Like somebody opened it with a vengeance. Then we heard Mike groan some more. And then we heard some shuffling around in a struggle. All of this seemingly impossible to hear. And then we heard a body thunk on the sidewalk below. It sounded awful. It sounded like somebody's head had just now cracked wide open. Well, we went to one of the windows in the master bedroom, opened it, and looked down below. There were several strange things that we saw, that we observed right away. Well, there was no sound coming from the entire block. In fact, nobody was visible in any direction at all. I'd never seen that before. Never. And this was New Year's Eve? Nobody even laid on the sidewalk below. The entire coast was clear. Then we heard the window next door slam shut while we were looking out my window. The three of us were lost in our thoughts. Then we heard Mike again, but not through the walls now. We heard him from down on the street, down on the sidewalk, calling up to us to throw down the key so that he could get in the building. His voice was normal, too. And he was saying this: "Yo, Turk, Jimmy, it's me, Mike, throw down the key." And he kept repeating it. We looked out the window again. Nobody was down there. I said to Jimmy and Tina that his physical body must be on that little bed still. But that's it. That's all of them that's there. His astral body is what we now somehow were made privy of hearing getting tossed out the window, and now just as mysteriously we're hearing calling to us, for he doesn't realize that he's perhaps dead. That's what I said. I told Jimmy that all we can do is wait. I had already taught he and Jimmy alike, but now referring to Mike, that if he ever finds himself in a situation just like this, all he has to do is get somewhere is to will it. I said he'd figure this out if that's his situation. He'll figure it out. He'll remember sooner or later. And when he does, he'll just fly up to his body or to wherever he wants to go. You should have seen Tina look at me when I said all of that. First time she'd ever heard anything like that. Jimmy, however, he'd heard it before, so, and he just nodded like, yeah, guess you're right. Yeah. Soon Mike stopped asking for the key, stopped yelling up, and we estimated he'd figured out what had happened. And now, reluctantly, Jimmy lit a white candle and went into the apartment next door himself. But now he was gone for at least a half an hour. Tina and I waited and waited. We waited so long that we both felt sick in the stomach. I didn't want to have to go in there after both of them now, Jimmy and Mike, but I was about ready to do that. When finally Jimmy entered from the hallway, nearly carrying Mike. Jimmy looked worn out. Mike looked just about dead. Mike couldn't talk for another half hour or so. Couldn't even talk. His face was severely swollen and bruised. Both of his eyes were almost closed from bruising and swelling. The left side of his body was soaking wet, while the right side of his body was completely dry. Black and red candle wax was dripped all over him, and neither of them had Mike's white candle. There had been no black or red candles burning that we knew of. We didn't have any. Didn't see any over there. Neither one of them had Mike's white candle. Jimmy had only his own. Jimmy said that he'd found Mike on the little bed with the little pillow covering his face and that Mike had not been breathing. Jimmy said nothing about any creature. He only commented that Mike's candle had burned all the way down and was about to ignite the dresser, so he had put out the flame just at the right time. Eventually, Mike's consciousness came back a bit toward normal, and I asked him, what happened in there since I'd left? Well, he said that he had climbed down from the boxes to leave, but that instead he had laid face down on the bed to get some sleep. Then some animal had got up on the bed and was walking around his head. He said he couldn't move, but that he could see that the animal had hairy hooves instead of paws or feet. He said it wouldn't leave him alone, and so he had told it over and over to just let him leave him alone so that he could go to sleep. He just wants to go to sleep. Then I asked him what happened to his face, and he replied, oh yeah, then the thing threw me out the window and I landed on my face. Yeah. Didn't you hear me yelling up for you to throw me down the key? That's what he asked. I said, yeah. But how'd you finally get up? He said, well, I remembered what you told me. So I just flew on up and got back in my body, and then Jimmy came and got me. Well, how'd you get all this red and black wax all over you? I asked him. And what about this water on your left side? And he said, I don't know. I was asleep for all of that, I guess. Then he looked at me as though asking a question, but while speaking quite affirmatively. He said, you know, there's the good and there's the bad, and then there is the evil. I'd never heard him talk like that before. I don't even know where he got that. That's what he said. I walked past my skinny bedroom and I faced my wall a few feet inside my apartment door, so that on the other side of the wall would be the skinny room next door. I pressed my hands to the wall and I placed my forehead against it too. I cleared my mind, and then I did some good old mental telepathy. I mentally summoned the thing, be it black smoke or some hooved creature from hell, to the other side of the wall. When I felt that I had its attention, and that it was right there with its own head just on the other side of the plaster and bricks, I sent it a message. You fucked with me my first night here. I beat you. Now you have fucked with my friends, and now you must pay. We are going to open your door one more time and throw in some things. And once we close the door, you will go to bed and you will go to sleep yourself forever. You will never again bother anybody in this world. Your time here is finished. Do you understand? I felt a faint mental whimper coming back at me. Mike, Jimmy, and I dug into a bag full of carved stones that Jimmy had found somewhere. Each one was shaped like an Egyptian scarab. The bag contained hundreds of them. They were in 3 colors, red, pink, and blue. We each gathered together one of each color. I held the 9 of them in my hand and uttered a few phrases to clear them of all past history, karma, whatever, purpose. Then I uttered a few more to give them a fresh purpose. That is, that purpose being to send that creature to bed and to sleep forever. Then the three of us took our 3 colors each in our hands and walked into the hallway and opened the door of the apartment next door. The heck with the stuff that they had dragged over. This has gone too far, man. We opened the apartment next door, and on the count of 3, we stood outside the door. On the count of 3, with the apartment door open there next door, we all threw our scarabs as hard as we could. Each of us with 3, all 9 scarabs, as hard as we could, in through the opening door, into the darkness inside. We heard them all rattling against all the stuff in there, and one by one, they all landed on the floor, at our feet, outside the door. Right where we stood. All 9 of them, one by one. Rejected. I said out loud, "Oh, no you don't. Nah, that's not how this ends. Not this time." So we threw them in again. And again we heard them shuffle down through all the stuff. But this time, they all stayed in there. We closed the door and we never opened it again. We locked it and closed it. And that was that. And there was no more black smoke. No more nightmares. No more any such thing ever happened. A couple years later, I heard that workers came in and emptied out an entire apartment. And while they were doing it, apparently, nobody had noticed anything odd at all. Mike, Jimmy, and I each kept a stolen parfait glass for ourselves. That's all we kept. Mike, well, I kept the cast iron incense burner thing, and I eventually gave it to somebody else who wanted it badly. I had done some kind of little clearing ritual thing to it. Mike, Jimmy, and I each kept a stolen parfait glass for ourselves. Remember, there were 3 of them. Mike's broke to pieces while standing on a shelf. Not long after, Jimmy's rolled off a counter and shattered on the floor. Then Mike died of AIDS. My parfait glass lasted a few more years. And finally fractured like that reflective silver nitrate backing on that mirror. While standing on my porch in Pennsylvania, just all by itself, it fractured. While still standing there, just all fractured. And when I touched it, it fell to pieces. And like I said, Jimmy died in a fire. I ran into Tina a couple of years ago. She remembered it all, just like I now told her. I still have a photo of me wearing my magic hat. I still have photos of those hats. 1 photo of those hats. Well, there was a photo of me wearing my hat while standing in front of a mirror and reaching a hand toward the camera. But it's like reaching toward the mirror. Right? And under the picture, I have a caption that Jimmy had made up. The illusion is real. So's the story. I'm Taranki Ramacharaka.